It's a little intimidating, or else, but don't let it worry you. No, so I'd like to start out a little bit, just give you a little background. I'm sure you don't know who I am. I'm the VP of 3D Innovation at Shutterstock. I came along with the acquisition of TurboSquid about a year and a half ago. I was with TurboSquid for 9 years before that acquisition. Such an amazing team. We've kept much of that team, and we still love working with each other, as well as now working with all the great group at Shutterstock. So it's been really amazing. Before that, I had 15 years of advertising experience, 3D advertising. Really kind of pioneered things back in the 90s when machines were very expensive. They couldn't do a lot. 3D software was extraordinarily expensive and really hard to use. So doing some really great things for all those years. And then, of course, those last 10 years helping out TurboSquid and some of the work that I've done for different brands. It was just a lot of fun creating just beautiful imagery with 3D. And I just loved living in a completely 3D world, building 3D spots and titles and everything for shows and films that was basically 100% 3D. It just was my favorite thing to do. So what I'm going to dive into is sort of at a high level. I'm going to try not to get too much in the weeds. I can get extremely into the weeds when necessary. I'm going to try not to do that. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to make a couple assumptions. We're going to make assumptions that you actually have 3D content or that you have the resources to build that 3D content. So let's say, for instance, you don't have that yet. We're just going to pretend that you do. We're going to look into the future. You have that capability. So back in the early 2000s, I remember reading an article that said that every company was becoming a technology company. Every company. And the way we see it now is that basically now every company is becoming a 3D company. And here's what's really interesting is, so there's verticals in the 3D industry that we just never thought would even exist. I'll give you an example. So machine learning and simulation. Simulation is changing the way we do so many things now. It's simplifying the process of gathering data and understanding what real problems are and how to solve those problems. That's just one part of what's changing around us. Companies are now using AI and machine learning to really understand what the problems are, and they're using 3D to do that. But of course, I'm going to kind of focus a little bit more on the sort of e-commerce side of things. So what I've done is I've kind of just taken like 4 of my favorite verticals right now. There's digital shelf, of course, and what that means for all these e-commerce companies. We know well that brands like IKEA have done an amazing job of building out 3D libraries. I think now their catalogs are almost 100% 3D catalogs. It's really amazing. But digital shelf is something that now apparel is getting into, electronics are getting into, everyone is needing to sell their goods in e-commerce, and we know that. So digital shelf is pretty straightforward. Another one that I'm really loving lately is the 3D outdoor ads. They blow my mind. But it's getting products that engage users in real venues, in real world venues, get them engaged with 3D in a way that just wasn't possible before. And then of course, game advertising, which is going to be enormous. It already is. It's getting huge. Being able to take your things from your real world into your virtual world, things for your avatar, so forth and so on. Being able to buy things and having e-commerce experiences inside of games is really amazing. And then, of course, I have to use the M word, Metaverse. And you know what? I kind of like it. I'm going to use it. I'm going to keep using it until they tell me it's not cool anymore. It's just like the superhighway, like the information superhighway. We don't use that anymore, but at the time it was pretty cool. So we're going to use it for right now. We're going to be okay with that. But it's really changing the way 3D is going to exist for all users, right? So we're going to focus on those for right now. What's interesting about all of those is that essentially what you want is you want to build a 3D model or 3D scene or some sort of 3D thing that can be used in all of those experiences. But let's face it, there's no way you're going to get a single model in one single format that's going to flow into all these different experiences. You're going to need a GLTF. You're going to need a USDZ. You're going to need a max file with Corona renderer. There's always going to be something. that's going to be different. And that's okay, because you don't need one format to work for all of them. But there's a problem there. When you get a bunch of different formats, things get really complicated. So we're going to dive into that. What I like to say for the way that we sort of approach things with TurboSquid and now we do with Shutterstock is that we think of three components: standardization, automation, and organization. And I'll go through each one of those. We'll start with standardization. So with standardization, if you can build a base model that has at least a core set of components that can work across a variety of different platforms, you've got sort of a perfect intermediary. And with that intermediary, there's things that you can automate, or at least semi-automate, that can simplify the process of distributing or syndicating that content into different platforms. But the trick here is that knowing that you're going to have all these different file formats, all these different permutations, all these different bits and pieces that need to sort of live together, not to mention the metadata. I won't get too deep into that, but think about this. In the simulation world, metadata on 3D models now need to have physical data. In other words, how hot does that get? That's going to be important for that 3D model, and that information is going to need to live somewhere. And as of right now, it can't necessarily live in the 3D model. Depends on the application, but generally speaking, as an interchange format, it's not there. So you'll need a sidecar, or you'll need some way to carry that metadata around. So now we're even talking about not just the 3D model, not just the textures that go with it, the caches of particles, the metadata that goes with it. You've got all of these things that you now need to compress together, and that's where organization comes in. Am I going at a good pace? Not too crazy here? Okay. So let's talk about standardization just for a second. So we do have a specification that we developed at TurboSquid. We have a V2 that's coming out soon for what we call stem cell. And what stem cell does is, imagine at TurboSquid we had models coming from artists from all over the world, thousands of artists at different skill levels. Some had no production experience, some had tons of production experience, and they're all coming together in one place. And you can imagine what a show that was, right? So what we decided was, let's break this down. Let's make something simple, right? Let's make something that kind of takes everything down to its core concepts and put that together in a specification that's really just a specification of best practices. And what does that look like? So we decided that these were some of the components that were the most important. Clean meshes. Have the artists learn how to at least create a clean mesh, right? A clean 3D model. Make sure it's organized. Name those parts correctly. Name the different model parts correctly. Name the different materials correctly. Unwrap it. We need UVs, right? You need to be able to take something like this and unwrap it so that I can put textures on it. And you need texture-based materials, because let's face it, no matter how much we want it, material X, a standard surface from Autodesk, which I love all, by the way, it's going to be really hard to get that material to look the same all the way across. So we can bake all that in textures, and we can carry it across. We can automate that. And then finally, naming conventions, making sure that they name things just in a smart way so that we can automate the process of converting things, right? So with that, when we do those things, oh, I think I have a slide missing. Oh, here. Actually, I'm going to jump ahead. Sorry. When we do those things, what we end up with is a model that works pretty well in all these different applications. Maybe it gets you 90% there, maybe 95, maybe 98. But it at least gets you to a point that if someone wanted to just go and refine something, they wouldn't have to spend 2 days doing it. They might only have to spend 10 minutes. And that was amazing, right? That was an amazing thing for us to realize, that you could take this model, and instead of trying to force the same format like an FBX or a OBJ into all these different applications, we could build native experiences in all these different applications through automation by standardizing. So I'll go back a little bit and I'll show you what I mean by automation. So what we do with the stem cell is we generate a variety of DCC formats. So your standard 3D Studio Max, Maya, Cinema 4D, and Blender. We also have combinations of offline renderers, Arnold physical renderer and Cinema 4D. We also do real-time engines, Unreal Engine, Unity, and just recently Omniverse. Which Omniverse is pretty amazing, by the way. And then, of course, we do exchange formats. And some of our favorites, of course, are GLTF and USDZ, right? Because you get a lot from those. GLTF, huge fan of it, by the way. Kronos Group, if you're not aware of it, take a look. They're doing an amazing job with GLTF. Then we also do model conforms. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So a model conform is basically I have a model, and I need it to work for a specific application. Omniverse would be an example of that. Omniverse has specific needs that I need to put in so that you can just get a native experience. I can just load an Omniverse model, bring it right in, and it just works. Looks great, right? So we can do model conforms through automation. And then, of course, model decimation. If you're not aware of what decimation is, it's basically just simplifying that model down so it works for real time. In other words, if you really need it to work for something, a light-duty purpose, like AR, I want to look at a shoe on my foot, it's going to have to be pretty light for you to do that. We can do all that through automation because we standardized first. So now that's great, right? We've got a stem cell model, we've got all the textures, we've got the DCC formats, we've got offline renderers, we got the model conforms, the decimations, different LODs, so you got one that's like a little bit less dense, you got one that's a lot less dense. And then you have all the things you can do outputs with for that, right? AR. We have our own TurboSquid, which is a spinner that you can use for 2D artists so that they don't have to use 3D. All amazing because it can all be done through automation. But you've got all these things, and now you have to organize them. This chart is a way simplified version of what we would have to deal with in a lot of cases. You would have metadata at the top, the asset itself. Let's say it's that robot. That robot would have metadata associated with it at an asset level. It would have images associated with it, so you could see what it is. You could search for it. You could say, oh, yeah, that's the one that I'm looking for. I need the orange one. But you also have the DCC outputs, the textures that go with that, the renders that go with that, because they might be slightly different, and you just want to see what that looks like. You've got LODs. I mentioned those earlier, all these different types. And then you've got real-time outputs. All of those need to live somewhere, and it can't be in a folder structure on someone's drive somewhere. The point that I always make is that it doesn't matter how organized you think you are, somebody thinks you're not. And when they go to find that model, they're not going to be able to find the pieces, parts that they need in order to use it. So you need a way to organize that. It's very important. So looking at this, what we did was we came up with Kraken. We do have a 3D DAM that we had to develop for ourselves because we had to be able to organize this content. It was important that we had content coming from all these different users and all these different places, and we needed somewhere to put that. We needed some way to control it. We also needed a way to be able to spark off automated jobs, right? Like if I've got the stem cell model and it's ready to go, I need a way to be able to take that and push that through our pipeline and then make sure that QA it and make sure that it looks right and then be able to go in and modify and change whatever I needed. So we needed a DAM system to do that. And that's a crucial part as you start digging into building out these massive 3D libraries, which we're all going to do. We're going to need a way to organize them, and we're going to have to be really, really smart about it. So that is what we focused on for the last 5 years, I would say, or maybe where we really kind of began productizing that because we saw the importance of it. I want to go back a little bit, and I do want to talk about stem cell real quick. Because this is making the assumption that you have someone that can help you build 3D models, and you have someone you can give a specification to. I want to make it clear that this is a specification that works for us. Because of the type of models that we're doing and because of who our customers are, this is what works for us. You may have very, very specific needs. You might be a furniture manufacturer who has very luxurious fabrics. You might not be able to get what you need from just your standard texture-based materials. You might need something more than that. That's fine. But make that decision early on. Look at that, look at your pipeline and try to figure out early on, what do I need to do? What do I need to do to make sure that I'm specifying all the things that could go wrong and making sure that I've got a nice, compact, and easy way for artists to create this content. Whatever modifications you need to make them. Stem cell is free. You can go on our site, you can look and see what that specification looks like. We worked with many, many partners out there to make sure that we were adhering to what was industry standards, what we felt like was the best for our customers. But again, you can use that as a base to start with, and then from there you can continue to evolve it. So just something to be mindful of. So I'll jump back towards the end. I do want to leave some time for questions because hopefully people have some. But I'm going to talk about a couple of key takeaways. Like I was just saying, create a 3D modeling specification that works for your organization. That's one of the most important things. Start with an easy foundation. Kronos Group, I mentioned them earlier, they also have a great specification to sort of get you understanding like what are some of the versatile things you can do to make sure that you're building for all these different experiences. The second point is that the standardization then opens up your automation possibilities. It makes it so that this perfect intermediary can now work for all these experiences that we know about today. And ideally, all the experiences we're going to learn about in the near future. When we talk about Metaverse, we have no idea what that means yet. It's going to change so much. Just get ready when hopefully, fingers crossed, Apple releases something or talks about something soon about their AR experience. I think it's going to make a big change. And that the last part is that 3D assets are extremely robust and complex. They contain so many pieces, parts, so many bits that all need to be put together, and don't underestimate the importance of metadata. Metadata that's not just associated with an asset and all the components below it, but metadata that's at the actual model level. How many polygons does it have? How many materials does it have? How many objects does it contain? Those things are really important for people making decisions on whether or not that model is going to work for the experience that they want to use it for. So metadata, do not underestimate the importance of that. So with that, I'll leave it up to you now. Any questions from anyone? It's fine if there's not. Yeah, go ahead. Is there a mic?
Yeah, hi. I'm over here.
Oh.
Oscar Castillo from Northrop Grumman. I have a background in engineering and CAD, and I'm very fascinated by this topic, especially your comments on metadata. It's starting to remind me back to my CAD days. And you talked about building a system that's best for your business and your customers.
Exactly.
And I'm kind of curious, has the concept of like configuration management come up? Like, do models evolve over time, and do you need to manage that as well?
That's actually a great point. So, and speaking of CAD too, CAD is like a whole like world in itself, right? There's a lot of complexity in there, and we also do rely on CAD for a lot of the models that we create as well. But essentially, I would say that one of the important things to remember is that there's some fundamentals with tessellated models, and when I say tessellated models, I mean models that are not CAD, but they're just meshed models. There's fundamentals that we're going to be living with for a long, long time. And the moment that we're at right now is an amazing moment because we've figured out so many things. I'll give you an example. So PBR materials. So if you're not familiar with PBR materials, it's basically, it's a standardization that came out by Disney back in 2012. And it essentially simplified the process of creating materials for 3D. Greatly simplified it. That has gained legs like you wouldn't believe in just the last 5 years, right? Now everything supports PBR. So it's being conscious of those things, really looking at the industry and kind of understanding what these little things are and making sure you adhere to those. Being smart about it and not getting too lost in your own head of like, well, I really think we should have this specific parameter. There's just a range of parameters that are needed to get that 90% there. And if you need to go further than that, then let a 3D artist do it. We still have tons of great 3D artists out there. Let them do it. But just look at things at the simplest level and make sure you're building to that level. Does that answer your question? Sorta? Okay.
Up until now, I thought Teslated was after you got out of a Tesla. So
It's both.
So my question is about some clarification around what Kraken is.
Kraken.
So Kraken, is that a CMS as a service that you offer, or?
It's not technically a CMS. It's a dam, right? So it's basically it's a way to structure data so that it's easily searchable, it's easily tagged, and it's easy to also push into an automated pipeline. So it's not quite like a CMS where I can like send things off to the web or to an AR experience. It's basically a way to organize your 3D content.
Is it a service?
It is.
Okay.
Yes.
And so you sell it as a subscription?
We sell it as it's sort of as a subscription. Depends on what you want to do with it. It's sort of an enterprise offering right now.
Hi there.
Yeah.
My question is also about Kraken.
Yeah.
One of the challenges I've seen in like art creation pipelines and asset storage, specifically in the 3D DAM space, is around version control. Does Kraken take an opinion on version control, or does it, do you go by file name 1, 2, 3, these sorts of things?
We have logic for version control. We want to make that more robust. Mm-hmm. It's not going to be like Perforce or something like that, where you're using it in an actual production pipeline. This is really a place where you're storing your library. Mm-hmm. So it has versioning, but it's not quite maybe what you're thinking, where the artist knows that this is the absolute latest, and it's only one that they can load into their application.
Okay, so it's like variants almost.
Exactly.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
we have one more over here.
Couple slides back, you mentioned a variety of formatting, starting with metadata and the real raw asset and pictures. You went through FBX, and you also covered other formats. Yep. Have you looked at USD, not USDZ, but USD? Because you mentioned Omniverse
Yes.
and several others.
So yes, USD for sure. Luckily for us, Omniverse is USD, although it uses MDL as for the material data. But yes, we have looked heavily at USD, and we see a bright future in what some of the things that we can do in Kraken with USD, especially when we start talking about permutations, posing, different models, being able to contain all those things under one asset without it needing to necessarily live on Kraken, that you could take all of that within a USD and then hand that off to someone else to use. So USD is extremely important to us, and it's a focus that we have for the coming year.
Thank you so much, Dade. That was fantastic. And I say, release the Kraken.
Release the Kraken.
All right, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Let's have a big hand for Dade.